Settle in with a cup of tea and your imagination. This is Detective Duo, where every clue finds its place, just as Tommy and Tuppence would have insisted. Don't forget to subscribe and tell us where in the world you're joining from. It began, as many of Tuppence Beresford's small adventures did, with an entirely innocent intention that refused to stay that way. She had meant only to tidy the trunk. The thing had sat under the window of their South Audley Mansions flat for years, large, leather-bound, smelling faintly of camphor and neglect. It was one of those repositories of half-forgotten lives, a mixture of souvenirs, letters, and the unaccountable detritus of two people who had spent a good portion of their youth running about Europe chasing secrets. Tommy had retreated behind the morning paper when Tuppence declared her intention to, at last, impose order on the past. He looked up only when she sneezed violently in a puff of dust. "Bless you, old girl. The past doesn't seem to appreciate being disturbed." "Neither does the present," she retorted, brandishing a moth-eaten shawl. "Really, Tommy, did we keep this for sentimental reasons or because we thought moths deserved a fighting chance?" He smiled over the top of the paper. "Probably both." The sound of rustling envelopes followed. Tuppence had found a small bundle tied with ribbon, its edges browned and fragile. Her fingers paused. "Now, this looks promising." Tommy folded his newspaper with the air of a man resigned to distraction. "Another billet due from your army of admirers?" "If it is, they aged rather badly." She held up one envelope. The ink faded to a sepia whisper. "Look here. This one's addressed to Mrs. Thomas Beresford." "That's me, isn't it?" "Last I checked." "It says, 'To be opened only in dire circumstances.'" He raised an eyebrow. "And are we in dire circumstances?" Tuppence considered. "The state of this trunk may qualify." He laughed. "Then open it, for heaven's sake. If it explodes, we'll call it fate." She slit the envelope delicately with a hairpin and drew out a single sheet. The handwriting was thin and spidery, the sort that suggested haste and anxiety. She read silently at first, lips tightening, then aloud. "The debts of war are never fully paid." She frowned. "No signature, only initials. W.R. Who on earth?" Tommy's expression changed subtly, the humour fading. "Vienna stamp, 1918. That was near the end, wasn't it? The last days of the old network." "Exactly," she murmured. "And that phrase, I've heard it before." The room, with its comfortable London clutter and afternoon sunlight slanting across the rug, seemed to dim slightly around them. The past had a way of invading without knocking. Tommy leaned back, hands clasped behind his head. "Could be a joke, or a warning. You had a few colourful correspondents in those days." "Not from Vienna," she said slowly. "Not after Weiss." At that name, they both fell silent. Colonel Weiss, their old adversary from the intelligence game, cunning and courteous, a man who could make treachery sound like philosophy. He had vanished after the war, presumed dead. Presumed, but never proven. Tuppence folded the letter again, very precisely. "If it is connected to him, we ought to know why it's come back now." "Maybe it hasn't come back," Tommy suggested. "Maybe it's been here waiting for us to grow curious." The notion had a chill to it. Tuppence set the letter down on the table and poured herself tea to disguise the faint tremor in her hand. The liquid steadied her more than the logic did. "I wonder," she said, "if this was left for me by someone who thought I'd never stop poking at mysteries." "That was a poor assumption," Tommy said cheerfully. "You've made a hobby of it." A knock at the door interrupted them. 3 short raps, confident but unfamiliar. Tommy glanced at his watch. Not the milkman, and too early for Mrs. Sprott from downstairs. Tuppence went to the door, smoothing her skirt, and opened it to find a man of about 60 standing there. He was lean, weathered, the sort of man who'd spent too much time outdoors and in danger. His bowler hat had seen better decades, and his manner was that peculiar mix of military precision and personal unease. "Mrs. Beresford?" he asked. "Yes." He inclined his head slightly. "Captain Hugh Merriman. I believe we served under the same umbrella, though not perhaps the same corner of it." Tuppence blinked, then smiled faintly. "Intelligence, then." "Once," he said, stepping in as Tommy appeared behind her. "Mr. Beresford, good to see you, sir. Forgive the intrusion, but it may not wait." Tommy gestured to a chair. "Intrusions that begin like that never do." Sit down, Captain. Tea? No, thank you. Merriman's eyes scanned the room, taking in the open trunk, the scattered papers, the single envelope lying on the table. I see you found it. Found what? Tuppence asked. The letter, he said quietly. I hoped you might have burned it by now. The words landed like small stones in the silence. Tommy sat forward. You know about it then? I posted it, Merriman admitted. In 1918. I was instructed to send it if certain conditions arose. And have they? Tuppence asked. He hesitated. Possibly. That depends on whether you've heard from anyone else recently. Any strange letters? Visitors? Only you, Tommy said. Unless you're counting the gas man. Merriman's mouth twitched but didn't smile. Then I'm afraid you soon might. Someone's been looking for surviving members of our division, asking too many questions. 2 of our old associates are dead under questionable circumstances. Tuppence felt the weight of the past tighten around her. Accidents? Officially, he leaned closer. But both were found with a phrase carved or written nearby. The debts of war are never fully paid. The echo of the letter's words hung in the air. Tommy whistled softly. Well, that's neatly circular. I came because I thought you should know, Merriman said. If Weiss, or whoever carries his cause, is alive, you may be next on their list. Tuppence's eyes narrowed. You said if. You don't sound convinced. I'm never convinced of ghosts, Merriman replied, but some men don't die cleanly. Weiss was one of them. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small photograph, creased and faded. This was found in Paris last month, tucked inside a coded file. That's Weiss, 10 years older than when we last saw him. Tommy took it, studying the familiar hawk-like features. Or someone who wants us to think so. Either way, Merriman said, standing, the legacy of that man hasn't finished with us. He moved toward the door, pausing only once. Be cautious, both of you. If anyone contacts you claiming to be from the ministry, verify it first. Old enemies often borrow old uniforms. After he'd gone, silence filled the flat again. Thicker this time, like unspoken questions pressing on the air. Tuppence turned the Vienna envelope over in her hands. Do you believe him? I believe he believes it, Tommy said, which is almost worse. She gave a small, grim smile. Well, if the past insists on revisiting us, it might at least send a postcard first. Perhaps it did, he murmured, glancing at the letter. We were just slow opening it. The afternoon light had faded into that uncertain hour between tea and twilight, when everything in the room seemed to belong to memory, the ticking clock, the faint scent of polish, the soft whisper of traffic outside. Tuppence folded the letter once more and set it carefully atop the trunk. Dire circumstances, she said under her breath. I suppose we'll find out soon enough how dire they are. Tommy looked at her with the mixture of admiration and apprehension familiar to any husband married to adventure. My dear girl, if that's an omen, I wish you'd at least let me finish my tea before destiny calls again. She laughed, a small, bright sound that defied the unease. Drink quickly, then. Something tells me we're going to need our wits about us. And somewhere in the corridor outside, the lift clanged softly, the sort of sound that could mean nothing at all, or everything about to begin again. It was just after 8 the next morning when the telephone in the Beresfords' flat began its steady, insistent ring, the sort of ring that suggested the caller had something serious to impart and wasn't the least inclined to wait. Tommy, in shirt sleeves and halfway through buttering his toast, eyed it with mild suspicion. Something tells me, old girl, he said, that Peace and Marmalade are about to make a swift exit. Tuppence, still in her dressing gown, set down the morning paper. Answer it before destiny goes to voicemail. Tommy crossed the room and lifted the receiver. Beresford residence. There was a pause, then a clipped voice. Mr. Beresford? Captain Merriman, if you please. Morning, Captain, Tommy said cheerfully. You're an early bird. What can I do for you? I wonder if you and your wife would permit me to call, immediately. There's been further news. His tone, even through the crackle of the line, carried urgency edged with something more fragile, fear perhaps. Of course, Tommy said. Half an hour suit you? 15 minutes. The line clicked dead. Tommy replaced the receiver slowly. He's rattled. Which means, said Tuppence, pouring herself tea, that something interesting has happened. Do try to look less delighted about it. She had only just changed into a sensible skirt and jacket when the bell rang. Merriman entered without his usual composure. His eyes were sharp but unfocused, like a man who hadn't slept properly. He refused breakfast, refused coffee, and refused to sit until he had locked the door behind him. "I shan't stay long," he began. "Something's stirring, and I've little time." "You said last night," Tuppence prompted gently, "that certain of our old colleagues had met untimely ends." "3 now," Merriman corrected grimly. "I confirmed the third an hour ago. All men connected to the same post-war clean-up operation. Officially accidents, unofficially deliberate." Tommy frowned. "You're certain?" "Each was found with a message, the same phrase. You've seen it yourself." Tuppence went to the mantel and retrieved the letter. "The debts of war are never fully paid," she read aloud. "Rather dramatic for a killer's calling card." "Or a warning," Merriman murmured. "Perhaps both." He took a folded document from his breast pocket, edges singed as if it had recently escaped fire. These were intercepted fragments from a correspondence in Vienna, mentions of something called the Legacy Project. That term was ours, an internal code name for certain restitution operations after the war. If someone's using it again, they've either stolen the old files or were part of it themselves. "Which means someone from our own side," Tommy said. "Exactly. There were rumors years ago, missing ledgers, secret accounts. If they resurface, they could ruin careers, governments, maybe more. Someone's making sure the truth never comes out." A sudden trill from the hall interrupted them. The telephone again. Merriman's head jerked toward the sound like a hunted animal. "I can't be traced here," he said abruptly. "I must go. I'll contact you this evening once I've confirmed something." Tommy frowned. "Surely you can tell us what you suspect." Merriman shook his head. "Not yet. It's safer if you don't know, but if I should—" He stopped himself, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just be cautious. If the past is reaching for us again, it won't knock politely next time." And with that he was gone, his footsteps quick and fading down the corridor. Tuppence exhaled slowly. "Well, that was cheerful breakfast conversation." Tommy rubbed his chin. "He's either onto something enormous or having a first-class nervous breakdown." "Possibly both," she said. "Still, I dislike men who promise revelations and then vanish before pudding." They went about their day with a vague unease that refused to settle. Tuppence found herself glancing toward the telephone every hour, half expecting it to ring again. It didn't. By evening, the unease had hardened into worry. At 9, Tommy suggested the obvious. "Perhaps we should ring his club. Old soldiers are creatures of habit." The call lasted less than a minute. Tommy's face changed as he listened, then quietly replaced the receiver. "Well?" Tuppence demanded. "He won't be calling," Tommy said softly. "They found him this afternoon, dead in his armchair at the Athenaeum. Doctor says heart failure." Tuppence stared at him. "Heart failure?" "Apparently sudden. The barman said he'd come in pale, ordered whiskey, read a telegram, and collapsed. The police aren't suspicious." "Of course not," she said. "The police never are until they have to be." Tommy's voice was grave now. "I'm going down there." "I'm coming with you." "Absolutely not." "Tommy," she said firmly, "if there's one thing experience has taught you, it's that saying that sentence never works." The Athenaeum was quiet at that hour, dignified, lamplit, the air heavy with leather and old brandy. Merriman's body had been taken away, but the hush of the place still seemed to bear his outline. The club secretary, a thin man who disapproved of emotional displays, showed them to the lounge where it had happened. Tuppence examined the scene with the instinct of someone who'd once read faces instead of fingerprints. "He sat here," she murmured, tracing a finger along the chair's armrest. No struggle, no overturned glass. Tommy knelt by the side table. Whiskey decanter half full, 1 glass, a burnt scrap in the grate. He fished it out carefully with the poker. Still warm. Someone tried to destroy something. The scrap, fragile and blackened, bore 3 visible words: Legacy, Vienna, Red House. Red House, Tuppence repeated. A name, a place? Or an organization, Tommy mused. Legacy again, that ties it directly to his warning this morning. They both fell silent, the weight of it settling between them. Merriman had been alive and fearful mere hours ago. Now the one man who might have explained everything lay on a slab in the city morgue. Tuppence straightened. "Do you think he was killed?" Tommy's jaw tightened. If it was murder, it was subtle. Something slipped into his drink, perhaps, easy enough to pass for natural failure. And whoever sent that telegram knew exactly where he'd be. "Which means," she said quietly, "his killer wanted it to look ordinary." The secretary returned, coughing discreetly. "If you're quite finished, Mr. Beresford, the police have requested all visitors sign the incident ledger." "Of course," Tommy said smoothly. "We'll trouble you no further." Outside, the cool night air seemed suddenly welcome. London was wide awake, indifferent to death. Motorcars humming, the faint glow of shop windows closing for the evening. Tuppence tucked her arm through Tommy's. "So what now, darling? File it under tragic coincidence and go back to knitting." He smiled faintly. "You don't knit." "Then under hopeless mystery and make cocoa." He stopped under a street lamp, the light catching the lines around his eyes. "No, Merriman didn't risk coming to us only to die by coincidence. There's a thread here, and it starts with those 3 words." She considered. "Legacy, Vienna, Red House. Vienna we can trace. Legacy we've heard. Red House sounds British, though. Country property, perhaps." "I'll check the land registry tomorrow," he said. "And I," said Tuppence, "will check the obituaries. If someone's hunting our old comrades, we might see the pattern better than the police do." They began to walk again, their steps echoing against the quiet pavement. After a moment, Tuppence said softly, "You know, Tommy, I rather wish we'd never opened that trunk." He chuckled without humour. "You're the one who believes curiosity keeps one young." "Yes," she said, "but youth is so overrated when it gets you murdered." They turned the corner towards South Audley Mansions. Behind them, somewhere in the drifting London dark, a car engine started. Not loud, not close, but distinct. Tommy paused, glancing back. The street was empty, save for the pools of lamplight. "Coincidence," he muttered. Tuppence gave a small, knowing smile. "In our experience, darling, coincidences are just crimes in fancy dress." The following morning brought pale sunlight and an uncomfortable sense of momentum. Tommy was at the desk with maps and reference books spread before him when Tuppence appeared carrying a tray. "I made coffee," she said, strong enough to interrogate. "Good, we'll need it." He looked up from a newspaper clipping. "There's a red house in Leicestershire. Used to belong to a Colonel Jeffreys, rented out recently. The new tenant listed as one Dr. Rudolf Leitner, Austrian." Tuppence's eyes brightened. "Vienna again." He nodded. "And if I know you, you're about to say something reckless." "Only," she said sweetly, "that staying home under the circumstances would be a crime." Tommy sighed with mock despair. "I knew it. You're incurable." "Precisely," she said, fetching her coat. "And besides, darling, who better to investigate an old enemy than the people who made him old in the first place?" Tommy followed her to the door, pocketing the burned scrap of paper. "Let's hope," he said dryly, "that this time we're not too late to meet the villain alive." And as they stepped out into the London morning, the weight of the past followed them, quiet, invisible, and very much awake. "You realise, of course," said Tommy Beresford, adjusting his tie with an air of solemn adventure, "that if we were sensible people, we'd be going to Brighton for a weekend instead of chasing dead men's secrets to Leicestershire." Tuppence, who was inspecting the railway carriage with a housewife's eye for untidiness, replied, "Sensible people are dull, and dull people are never murdered. There's some comfort in that." The train from St. Pancras was one of those dependable relics of English efficiency, a little shabby, faintly smelling of coal and upholstery polish, but determined to reach its destination. Outside, the countryside rolled past in green and gold patches, indifferent to the business of espionage or death. Tuppence unfolded the map. According to Merriman's notes, Red House lies 2 miles outside Market Harborough, past the canal. It was once used as a safe house for agents in 1917. "Charming," Tommy said. "If the wallpaper hasn't collapsed in patriotic duty by now, it'll be a miracle." She smiled faintly, but her eyes were thoughtful. "It was listed as abandoned until recently. The land agent's record says it's been purchased by a Dr. Rudolf Leitner." "The Austrian gentleman," Tommy murmured. That, my dear, sounds suspiciously like destiny putting on foreign accent and inviting us to tea. Let's hope it serves biscuits with the betrayal, she said. Market Harborough was all that an English market town should be, cobbled square, flower baskets, and a faint smell of hops and bakery in the air. Yet beneath its calm, the Beresfords sensed something reserved, almost watchful. They booked rooms at the Swan and Pheasant, a comfortable inn that compensated for its lumpy mattresses with honest curiosity. The innkeeper, Mr. Pritchard, greeted them with a politeness that stopped short of welcome. 2 nights, is it? Business or pleasure? Bit of both, said Tommy easily. We're visiting Red House. Pritchard's smile faltered. Red House, sir? Yes, just beyond the canal. Thought it was empty. Not empty now, Pritchard said quickly. New owner took it last spring, keeps to himself. Tuppence tilted her head. Oh? And what sort of man is he? Pritchard's hands worried the edge of his ledger. Foreign gentleman. Doctor, I believe. Keeps the place locked up mostly. No trouble to anyone. The phrase carried that faint tremor of provincial superstition that Tuppence had learned to recognize. She smiled lightly. Well, we're no trouble either, Mr. Pritchard, except at breakfast. I'm particular about my eggs. He nodded, but his eyes darted toward the doorway, as if even the mention of Red House might summon its master. When they had gone upstairs, Tommy closed their room door behind them. Well, that's one innkeeper who could give a corpse lessons in evasion. Tuppence sat on the edge of the bed, removing her gloves. He's frightened. I'm not sure of what, but it's not us. They set out that afternoon along the towpath. The canal ran like a quiet ribbon beside meadows and hedgerows, its still surface mirroring the clouds. A heron lifted itself from the reeds as they passed. Red House appeared beyond a stand of poplars, large, square, its red brick darkened by years and ivy. Curtains were drawn tight across the windows. No smoke rose from the chimneys. The iron gate was locked and bore a small brass plaque. Dr. R. Leitner. Tommy whistled softly. Well, it's certainly got atmosphere. Looks like a house that's holding its breath. Tuppence surveyed it with keen eyes. And those windows, all covered except one, top left. Someone's there, watching. He followed her gaze. For a fleeting second, a curtain stirred. Charming, he murmured. Shall we wave? I think not, she said. Let's not reveal we're amateurs. They circled the boundary, noting a low stone wall at the rear, half swallowed by nettles. Beyond it lay an overgrown orchard and a crumbling outbuilding. Used to be the gardener's shed, I'd wager, Tommy said. If we wanted a midnight peek, that's where we'd start. Speak for yourself, Tuppence said briskly. We'll start with information, not trespassing. Their next stop was the office of Mr. Arkwright, the local land agent. It smelled of ink, pipe smoke, and cautious confidentiality. Arkwright was a round man with a pink face and the kind of manner that implied he disliked both questions and the people who asked them. Red House, you say? He riffled through a drawer as though trying to lose their query among the papers. Yes, sold 6 months ago to a foreign gentleman. Austrian, I believe. Paid in full, no mortgage. Tuppence feigned mild surprise. Austrian? How cosmopolitan for Market Harborough. Yes, well, Arkwright said stiffly. We don't ask for nationalities when the banknotes are British. Tommy smiled. What sort of doctor did you say he was? I didn't, Arkwright replied. He didn't say either. Private research, he mentioned. Keeps odd hours. Still pays his bills. Have you met him yourself? Once. Polite, cold. The sort of man who measures handshakes. Tuppence leaned forward slightly. Did he mention Vienna? Arkwright blinked. Vienna? No, why should he? Just curiosity, she said. We knew someone who once lived there. Arkwright's expression softened with relief that the question had not turned political. Ah, well, good day to you both. They thanked him and stepped out into the street. Tommy exhaled. Private research, paid in cash, keeps odd hours. If that's not a villain's curriculum vitae, I don't know what is. Tuppence slipped her arm through his. Let's not decide yet. Villains sometimes have better manners than heroes. Evening settled with a faint smell of hearth smoke drifting through the square. The inn's small dining room was cheerful enough, candlelight on brass, chatter from the bar. Yet both Beresfords felt a prickling tension neither wine nor warmth could erase. As they finished supper, Tommy noticed the innkeeper again, Mr. Pritchard pretending to polish a decanter while keeping an eye on them. When Tommy raised his glass in friendly acknowledgement, Pritchard flushed and retreated behind the curtain. "Definitely frightened," Tommy murmured. "Perhaps Leitner frightens the whole village." "Or perhaps," said Tuppence, "someone else does." That night the wind picked up slightly, stirring the ivy against their window. The inn had gone still, save for the occasional creak of old wood. Tuppence lay awake, her thoughts circling the day like a restless bird. She rose quietly, wrapped her dressing gown about her, and peered through the curtain. The moon cast a pale path across the road leading toward the canal. Everything seemed silent until a movement by the hedge caught her eye. A figure stood there, half concealed in shadow, tall, motionless, watching the inn. Her pulse quickened. For an instant she thought she saw the gleam of spectacles. She turned quickly. "Tommy," she whispered. He stirred, groggy. "There's someone outside, by the hedge." Tommy was on his feet at once, pulling on his trousers. "Where?" "Across the road, near the gate." She turned back, but the hedge was empty. The figure had vanished. Tommy was already at the window. "Are you sure?" "Positive. I saw them, just standing there." He frowned. "Stay here." Within moments he was downstairs, the front door clicking softly behind him. Tuppence waited, the silence pressing on her. A minute passed, then 2. Finally his footsteps returned. He entered, hair ruffled, expression grim. "No one," he said. "Not a soul. I checked both ways to the canal. Unless they had wings or knew every garden wall, they're gone." Tuppence closed the curtain firmly. "Then we're not imagining it. Someone's watching us, and they're good at it." Tommy gave a short laugh. "Splendid. I do hate being underestimated." She smiled faintly. "So does the person who's doing the watching." They stood for a moment in the dim light, the sense of unseen eyes still lingering on the air. "Well," Tuppence said finally, "we wanted a little excitement." "Yes," Tommy murmured, glancing toward the dark road, "but I'd hoped it would wait until morning." Outside, Market Harborough slept, but somewhere beyond the hedges, someone clearly didn't. "Dr. Rudolf Leitner will see you now." "Dr. Rudolf Leitner will see you now," Mrs. Vogel said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed unease. She stood stiffly in the doorway of Red House, her hands clasped too tightly for mere professionalism. Tuppence caught the faint smell of polish and lavender, the scent of anxious cleanliness. Tommy gave a courteous nod. "Much obliged. We wouldn't want to interrupt any important research." The woman hesitated, then led them through a narrow hall lined with dark wood panels and faded portraits of anonymous men who looked as if they disapproved of visitors. Red House was no longer abandoned. The air carried the faint hum of order restored, polished furniture, carefully chosen flowers, an occasional tick of a clock somewhere beyond sight. Yet beneath it lingered something colder, the restraint of a place that was being watched from within. When the housekeeper opened the drawing-room door, the transformation was almost startling. The room was warm, bright, its furnishings elegant in a continental way. Silk curtains, a Viennese clock, and a gleaming samovar on a silver tray. A man rose from an armchair by the fire. He was in his early 40s perhaps, tall, dark-haired, impeccably dressed. His manner had that quiet assurance that comes from knowing one commands both the room and the conversation to follow. "Mr. and Mrs. Beresford," he said smoothly, with the faintest trace of accent. "What an unexpected pleasure. I am Dr. Leitner." Tuppence inclined her head. "I hope we're not intruding, Doctor. We were passing through and heard of your recent acquisition. I had rather a personal curiosity about the house." "Ah, curiosity," he said, gesturing for them to sit. "The historian's companion and the detective's excuse. Which are you, Mrs. Beresford?" She smiled. "A bit of both, I'm afraid, and my husband tolerates the habit." Tommy settled opposite him, the firelight glinting on his cufflink. "We understand you're engaged in research of your own, Doctor. Wartime espionage, wasn't it?" Leitner's dark eyes flickered with amusement. "Indeed. I'm collecting accounts for a book on intelligence activities during the Great War. Such stories fascinate me. Men and women in shadows, risking all for causes already forgotten." Tuppence stirred her tea. "Then you must find England rich in ghosts." "Oh, yes," he murmured. "But it is the living ghosts that interest me more. those who survived who must reconcile what they did with what they became. It was an oddly pointed remark. Tuppence caught Tommy's glance but chose to let silence answer it. Leitner leaned back, regarding them over the rim of his cup. "You were both in the service, were you not? Married afterward. Quite the celebrated partnership in certain circles." "That's rather well informed of you," Tommy said evenly. "Our files aren't exactly public reading." Leitner's smile was almost kind. "Ah, but history is a hungry creature, Mr. Beresford. It feeds on secrets, even those not yet offered." He rose and moved to the window, parting the curtain slightly. "This house," he said softly, "was used by your service as a safe house in 1917. I find that irony delicious. Now, it shelters an Austrian researching British heroics. How quickly time heals the prejudices of nations." "Or hides them," said Tuppence. Leitner turned, and for a moment the charm flickered, revealing something sharper beneath. "Perhaps." The pause that followed was long enough for the clock on the mantel to fill it with a single chime. Then, as if releasing the tension by choice, Leitner smiled again, a practiced gesture that restored civility. "Forgive me. I grow philosophical when I should be hospitable. May I tempt you with Sachertorte? My housekeeper bakes it with scandalous success." Tuppence accepted a slice out of politeness. The sweetness clung to the air, incongruous with the tone of their talk. "You must forgive our curiosity, Doctor," she said lightly. "It's not often we find our former hideouts taken over by charming historians. One wonders what exactly you're hoping to find." Leitner regarded her steadily. "Truth, Mrs. Beresford, always truth. It is the most elusive treasure of all." He said it with such finality that conversation stumbled for a moment. Then, with a smooth gesture, he turned the topic to art and architecture, and soon the talk wandered into Vienna's cathedrals, Mozart, and post-war restoration projects. Yet beneath his cultured ease, Tuppence felt a game being played, not of small talk, but of veiled tests. When Tommy mentioned Merriman's name casually, Leitner's hand paused midway to his cup. It was only for a second, but Tuppence saw it. "You knew Captain Merriman?" she asked gently. "I met him once," Leitner said. "He was very English." "That sounds dangerously close to criticism," Tommy remarked. Leitner's smile was almost fond. "Not at all. Englishmen are formidable when they believe they are being polite." Tuppence tilted her head. "And what do you believe, Doctor?" He looked directly at her. "That the debts of war are never fully paid." The words fell with the weight of deliberate echo. Tuppence's pulse skipped. Tommy's eyes narrowed. "That's quite a sentiment," Tommy said, "and rather an old one. I heard a man use it once, years ago." Leitner spread his hands. Perhaps he was right, perhaps wrong, but every historian must admit we live among unpaid debts, moral, political, personal. His tone was smooth again, almost indifferent, but Tuppence knew precision when she heard it. The phrase had not been accidental. When at last they rose to leave, Leitner accompanied them to the door. "It has been a pleasure," he said. "You must visit again before you return to London. The country has its stories, and some of them even end well." Tuppence smiled, though her eyes searched his. "We'll hope to find one of those." Outside, the sunlight was muted, the garden strangely still. "Well," said Tommy as they walked down the path, "what do we think of our Austrian gentleman?" "That he's too polite for innocence," Tuppence replied, "and he knows far too much about us." They paused by the gate. Leitner's car, parked in the drive, caught the light, a sleek black motor, immaculate. Something about it drew Tommy's attention. He crouched slightly, pretending to brush dirt from his trouser cuff, and read the small plate fixed below the license number. "Diplomatic," he murmured. "He's driving under immunity." "Which means," Tuppence said quietly, "if he's involved in anything unsavoury, we'll have to be twice as clever." "Or twice as fast," Tommy added. They began walking toward the lane. Behind them the faint sound of a door closing echoed, a soft, final click that seemed to end the interview rather than the visit. Out by the side garden, movement flickered. Someone else at Red House had business of their own. "Tommy," Tuppence said after a moment, "doesn't he remind you of someone?" He frowned. "I was thinking the same. Something about his voice, that That deliberate calm, like someone measuring every word for effect. "Colonel Weiss," she said quietly. Tommy stopped. "Good Lord, you think he's related?" "I think he's the right age to be Weiss's son, and if he's not, he's certainly studied him." Tommy exhaled. "If that's true, we've just had tea with trouble." Tuppence's lips curved. "We usually do." They walked on, following the lane back toward the canal. The quiet of the countryside now felt oppressive, as though the hedges themselves might be listening. Halfway down the road, Tuppence turned. From this distance, Red House looked utterly still, save for a flicker of movement near the side garden. "Tommy," she whispered, "look." A woman's figure, the housekeeper, had stepped into view, glancing anxiously toward the trees at the far end of the property. She lifted one hand in a quick, subtle motion, a signal, not a wave. "Someone's there," Tuppence said. "She's signalling." Tommy shaded his eyes. For an instant, a second silhouette moved among the trees, then was gone. "Friendly gardener," he suggested. "Or messenger," she said softly. "And whichever it is, she doesn't want the doctor to know." They walked on in silence for a while, the village roofs appearing ahead in the mild afternoon haze. At last, Tommy spoke. "Do you still think we're chasing Merriman's ghost?" Tuppence shook her head slowly. "No, I think Merriman led us straight into someone else's story. The question is whose, and how long they've been waiting for us to read it." The breeze rustled through the hedgerow, carrying the faint scent of cut grass and smoke, ordinary English things, comforting and deceptive. Behind them, Red House stood immaculate and still, its curtains drawn once more, concealing whatever debts and secrets had survived the war. And somewhere inside, Dr. Rudolf Leitner poured himself another cup of tea, the faint smile of a man who knew exactly how close his guests had come and how far they still had to go. The village clock struck 11 as Tommy and Tuppence Beresford stood in the shadow of the canal bridge, watching the last window of Red House go dark. "You know," whispered Tommy, "this sort of thing used to seem rather dashing. Now it feels like indigestion waiting to happen." "Stop grumbling," Tuppence replied briskly, tucking a small torch into her pocket. "You've always had a fondness for late-night trespassing. Besides, you're the one who insisted we needed evidence." "I said information," Tommy muttered. "There's a difference. Information doesn't usually come with locked doors and armed Austrians." But he followed her anyway, because he always did. The night was clear, the kind of mild English dark that carried every sound too far. The grass hissed softly underfoot as they skirted the hedgerow and approached the rear of the property. Red House loomed ahead, square and silent, its ivy glistening faintly under the moon. Tuppence crouched beside a low stone wall. "There, the old servants' entrance. Merriman mentioned it in his notes." Tommy knelt beside her. The narrow door, half hidden by creepers, bore a rusted padlock. He produced a small tool from his pocket with a grin. "One of life's enduring comforts, my dear. The army teaches you all sorts of impolite tricks." Within moments the lock gave a faint snap. The door creaked inward. Cold, stale air drifted out, the smell of damp brick and long-sealed secrets. "Ladies first," Tommy suggested. "Not this time," Tuppence whispered. "If there's a ghost, it might prefer a man's company." They slipped inside. The beam of Tuppence's torch sliced through the gloom, picking out shelves heavy with dust and a few cobwebbed bottles. The passage sloped gently downward. Their footsteps made the faintest echo, like whispers answering from the dark. "Charming," murmured Tommy. "Nothing like a bit of archaeology at midnight." The corridor opened into a small cellar chamber with vaulted brick ceilings. Wooden crates were stacked against one wall, some stenciled with faded letters, "Property of H.M. Government, 1945. Tuppence crouched beside one. The lid was already loose. She prized it open and drew out a sheaf of papers bound with frayed ribbon. "Tommy, look at this." Her voice dropped to a hush. "Official seals, Ministry of Reconstruction, code LP-17. LP, he repeated slowly. Legacy Project. The words seemed to thrum in the cold air. Tuppence spread the papers across the floor. Typed lists, receipts, coded correspondences, and one sheet headed Post-War Restitution, Vienna Sector, names, dates, locations. "It's a ledger of transactions," Tommy said, frowning. Payments made to intermediaries. Look here, neutral countries, hidden accounts. Money meant for rebuilding Europe, she murmured, or buying silence. Her torchlight caught something glinting on the opposite wall. She rose, tracing her hand along the brickwork until she found a slight hollow near the corner. "There's a draft here," she whispered. "A false wall, perhaps." Tommy ran his fingers along the mortar. One brick shifted faintly. "You're right. Help me with this." Together they eased aside a section of loose brick until a small recess appeared, just large enough for a tin box wrapped in cloth. Tuppence opened it carefully. Inside lay a photograph, slightly curled with age. 3 men stood beside a field car. One she recognized at once, Merriman, younger and smiling. Beside him, unmistakably, Tommy in his uniform. The third man, blurred by light and shadow, wore a long coat and hat. The face was half turned away, but even so, it carried a familiarity that made her breath catch. "Tommy," she said softly. "That's him, Colonel Weiss." Tommy stared. Good Lord. So it was Merriman who took this, or kept it. The photo trembled slightly in Tuppence's hand. And now Leitner owns the house where it was hidden. They exchanged a look that needed no words. The implications were heavy as the air around them. Then a faint sound broke the silence. A click, distant but unmistakable. The outer door. Tommy froze. "Someone's here." Tuppence extinguished the torch instantly. They stood in utter blackness, listening. The echo of slow footsteps descended the corridor above, deliberate, unhurried. Then a metallic clank. Tommy's whisper was a breath against her ear. "They've locked it." "Are you sure?" He tested the handle. It didn't move. Quite. For a moment, neither spoke. The cellar's darkness seemed to grow alive, pressing against them. Tuppence swallowed hard. "Options?" "Well," Tommy said quietly, "we could panic, or we could look for another way out." "I vote for the second." They searched quickly, the torch now dimmed by a handkerchief to a faint glow. The walls offered no escape. Then Tuppence's beam caught a narrow chute set into the far corner, a rusted metal frame leading upward. "Coal chute," Tommy said. "Narrow, filthy, and perfect." Tuppence wrinkled her nose. "You first, darling. You're broader. If you fit, I'll follow." "Flattering logic," he muttered, but began climbing. The chute was steep, lined with old soot. He pushed at the grate above. It resisted, then gave way with a groan. Moonlight spilled through. He hauled himself up, turned and reached down for her hand. "Come on, quick." Tuppence clambered after him, her coat catching once on a jagged nail. She emerged, coughing into the night air. They stumbled across the yard, hearts pounding. From inside the house came a sound, the unmistakable scrape of a bolt being drawn. "Someone's checking," Tommy said under his breath. "Move." They sprinted across the grass, ducking behind the hedge just as a lantern beam swept the yard. A figure appeared in the doorway, tall, lean, unmistakably male. For a heartbeat, the light illuminated the features. Dr. Leitner. He stood listening, then turned back inside, shutting the door softly behind him. Tommy exhaled. "So much for our historian." Tuppence brushed soot from her sleeve. "I believe we've just proven he's not writing about the past. He's rewriting it." They reached the inn near 1 in the morning, dishevelled and breathless. Mr. Pritchard, the innkeeper, was dozing by the dying fire. He startled awake as they entered, blinking at their state. "Good heavens, you look as if you've been down a mine." "Something of the sort," Tommy said mildly. "Terribly draughty night. You might want to oil that front gate. It squeaks like a confession." Pritchard's face paled, but he said nothing more. Morning came pale and thin, carrying whispers through the village like smoke. When Tuppence descended for breakfast, she found the innkeeper in hushed conversation with a constable. "What's happened?" she asked. Pritchard looked stricken. "It's Mrs. Vogel, the doctor's housekeeper, found dead at the bottom of the stairs at Red House. Poor soul must have slipped in the night." "An accident?" "So they say," the constable replied. "Neck broken clean. Dr. Leitner reported it at dawn. Claims he heard a thump, went down, found her there." Tuppence met Tommy's eyes. Neither spoke, but the same thought flashed between them. Coincidence had grown far too convenient. The constable tipped his hat. "You staying long in the village, ma'am?" "Only till tomorrow," Tuppence said smoothly. "We've a fondness for quiet places." He nodded and left. Pritchard hovered, visibly agitated. Terrible business. They say she was a strange woman, foreign like him. Kept to herself, but folks around here said the house was cursed. Cursed? Tommy repeated. Aye, bad luck, death's secrets. Some houses never forget what they were built for. When he'd gone, Tuppence turned to her husband. She was the one signalling in the garden yesterday. Now she's dead. Tommy poured coffee with deliberate calm. If Leitner killed her, it was either to silence her or to keep us from learning what she knew. Then the question is, she said quietly, what did she try to tell us? He leaned back, thinking. There's one way to find out. Go back. Tuppence arched an eyebrow. Oh, splendid idea. Break into the home of a possibly murderous historian who now knows someone's been rummaging in his cellar. Tommy smiled faintly. He doesn't know it was us. And besides, my dear, you always said staying home was a crime. She sighed, though her eyes brightened. I must learn to stop giving you slogans to quote back at me. He folded the photograph carefully into his wallet. We'll visit the constable first, hear the official story. After that, perhaps a polite call on Dr. Leitner to offer condolences. Condolences, Tuppence repeated. That's one word for it. They stood by the window. Across the square, villagers gathered in small clusters, whispering behind their hands. The morning light made everything look ordinary, too ordinary. But Red House, visible beyond the trees, sat silent and watchful, its windows blank as closed eyes. Tuppence murmured, "The debts of war, Tommy. They're still collecting." He slipped an arm around her shoulders. Then it's time someone started auditing. And together they turned toward the door, their curiosity sharpened now into something colder. Purpose, because Red House had given them its first secret. But it was far from finished with them yet. It was Tuppence who chose the place, an old tea-room off Charing Cross Road where the wallpaper had faded into the colour of secrets. The room smelled faintly of dust, bergamot, and the memory of better times. Very fitting, she murmured, adjusting the small vase on the table. If one wishes to summon ghosts, one must offer them tea. Tommy smiled. Let's hope these ghosts are more talkative than Merriman's. They had come to London under pretext of business, but their true purpose was reunion, a meeting of those who had once served in the same invisible war. Time had thinned their ranks. Some were gone, others untraceable, but 4 had agreed to come. At precisely 3 o'clock, the bell over the door gave a small, uncertain jingle. "Ah," said Tuppence quietly, "the past arrives on schedule." The first to appear was Miss Winship, a woman of indeterminate age, compact, sharp-eyed, and carrying a handbag that could probably decode a cipher without assistance. She still wore her hair in the no-nonsense bun of wartime efficiency. "Mrs. Beresford," she said, "you haven't changed a bit, which means you've become far more dangerous with age." Tuppence laughed. "You flatter me, Winship." "Facts don't flatter," Miss Winship replied, taking her seat. Next came Major Burnham, a tall man with a walking stick and a stiff upper lip to match. He greeted Tommy with a handshake like mild artillery fire. "Dashed good to see you, old man. Don't like this cloak and dagger nonsense anymore, though. My ticker complains." "It's only tea, Major," Tommy said. "No one's asked you to parachute into Vienna." The third arrival was a woman in bright blue gloves, Mrs. Clara Dean, once their courier between stations. Her energy filled the room at once, cheerful, a touch nervous beneath the chatter. "Darlings," she cried, "it's positively thrilling to see you all again, like the old days, only with better scones." And finally came Mr. Alec Thorne, once a field liaison, now a grey-haired solicitor with the quiet air of someone who remembered more than he ever said. When they were all seated, Tuppence poured tea with hostess-like calm, though her mind raced ahead. Tommy watched her discreetly. He knew that look. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "We wouldn't have called you unless it were important. It concerns Captain Merriman." Miss Winship raised an eyebrow. "Merriman's dead." "Yes," Tommy said, "and possibly murdered." That silenced the table. The clink of teaspoon against saucer was suddenly very loud. Burnham cleared his throat. "You're serious?" "We are," Tuppence said. Before he died, Merriman mentioned something called the Legacy Project. He thought someone was killing off those connected to it. Miss Winship frowned. "Legacy? Good heavens, I haven't heard that word in years." "You knew it then?" Tommy asked. "Oh yes. Legacy was a code name, one of those silly sentimental ones we used before everything became numerals. It referred to funds set aside during the war, hidden accounts meant to support resistance cells if the worst happened. After the armistice, the money was never fully accounted for. Some claimed it vanished into bureaucracy. Others, she added dryly, knew better. Alec Thorne spoke for the first time, his voice quiet. There were rumours afterward that some of the funds were diverted to buy cooperation to protect reputations. No one wanted the scandal. Scandal? Asked Mrs. Dean, eyes wide. He looked at her gravely. War breeds its own marketplace. Not every hero remained one when peace arrived. Burnham scowled. You're saying someone stole it? Not exactly, Miss Winship said. They repurposed it, which, in intelligence terms, is simply theft with paperwork. Tuppence set down her cup. And if Merriman found proof of it, documents, a ledger, he'd have had enemies in high places. There was a murmur of uneasy agreement. Mrs. Dean leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. You'll think me fanciful, but I've had letters too. Anonymous, typewritten. Debts unpaid are debts collected, they said. Twice now, in the same envelope. Miss Winship's brows shot up. When? Last week. I thought it was a prank until your invitation arrived. Alec Thorne nodded slowly. I received one as well. Slightly different wording. The legacy remembers. Burnham grunted. Sounds like melodrama to me. Melodrama, Tuppence said evenly, is often the mask of intention. The silence that followed was thoughtful, weighted. The tea had gone cold. Miss Winship tapped a fingernail against her cup. If someone has rediscovered those accounts, or the list of who manipulated them, it could ruin more than reputations. We're speaking of powerful men. They would rather bury the past than explain it. And if they can't bury it, Tommy said, they'll bury the people who know. Mrs. Dean gave a nervous laugh. Well, that's cheerful. Honestly, it feels like 1943 all over again. I half expect a dead drop behind the pastry counter. Let's hope not, said Tuppence. We'd hate to ruin the lemon tart. The mood lightened briefly, but beneath the small smiles lingered unease. Old comradeship rekindled under the wrong star. An hour later, the meeting began to break up. Miss Winship tucked her notes into her bag with military precision. If I were you, I'd find out exactly what Merriman knew, and quickly. This sort of thing doesn't stop with polite warnings. We intend to, Tommy said. Mrs. Dean slipped on her gloves. I'll check a contact of mine in the Foreign Office. Perhaps someone's been asking questions there. Ring me if you find anything. Same number as before, though heaven knows the exchange girls probably gossip less than they used to. She laughed again, bright and brittle, and swept out with a wave. Burnham followed, muttering something about a golf engagement he was already regretting. That left Miss Winship and Alec Thorne, who exchanged a look of old understanding. Be careful, Miss Winship said. If this is what I think it is, you're stirring ashes that still burn. We've handled fire before, Tuppence said lightly. Miss Winship gave her a thin smile. Yes, but this time, my dear, the fire remembers you. By the time they emerged into the street, dusk had fallen, that peculiar London half-light that makes every face uncertain. Tommy hailed a taxi, but Tuppence hesitated, glancing up the road. Where's Mrs. Dean? She left before us, he said. Probably caught a bus. Still, she murmured, frowning. She mentioned parking near the canal. That's a long walk in heels. She's done riskier things, Tommy said. Remember Lisbon? I do. She nearly got shot for being 5 minutes early, he chuckled. That was her charm. But the unease didn't fade. They dined later at their small London hotel, half their minds still at Red House. As the waiter cleared their plates, the telephone behind the desk rang. The clerk answered, spoke briefly, then approached their table. Mr. Beresford, Inspector Holt from the Metropolitan. He asks if you might come down to the station. Tommy exchanged a look with Tuppence. Now? It's urgent, sir. Inspector Holt was a tired man, his uniform smelling faintly of rain and tobacco. He greeted them with perfunctory politeness. Sorry to drag you out. We understand you are meeting today with certain former service personnel, including a Mrs. Clara Dean. Yes, said Tuppence. Why? Has something happened? The inspector sighed. Her motor car was found abandoned near Paddington Canal about an hour ago. Door open, key still in the ignition. No sign of the lady herself. Tommy's face tightened. Accident? Unlikely. No skid marks, no struggle, just gone. Tuppence sat very still. And the letters? Holt's eyes narrowed. You know about those then. There was one in her glove compartment. Same phrase as before. Debts unpaid are debts collected. The room seemed suddenly smaller, the lamplight harsher. Tommy stood, his voice steady. Inspector, we believe Mrs. Dean's disappearance is connected to a larger affair. It concerns an operation once called the Legacy Project. People are dying because of it. Holt looked doubtful. That's a large claim, sir. It's also a true one, said Tuppence quietly. And if we're right, Mrs. Dean won't be the last. They left the station past midnight. The air outside was cold, clean, and unforgiving. A newspaper boy was shouting something about a cabinet reshuffle, utterly irrelevant to the private catastrophe unfolding around them. Tuppence walked in silence for several minutes, her gloved hands clasped tightly around her handbag. "Do you think she's alive?" she asked at last. Tommy hesitated. If she was taken, it means she knew something. That's both danger and leverage. Comforting, she said dryly. Half the time I can't decide whether you reassure me or terrify me. He slipped an arm around her shoulders. Let's call it a partnership of useful contrasts. She managed a faint smile. And where do we go from here? Back to Market Harborough, he said. The trail started there and it hasn't finished. Leitner, Merriman, the photograph, they're all pieces of the same game. We just haven't seen the board yet. Tuppence nodded. Then we'd better look before someone removes us from play. They reached the corner where the street lamps ended, the darkness beyond like the edge of a chessboard. As they turned toward the hotel, a car engine started somewhere nearby, a smooth purr, too familiar. Tuppence stopped, her eyes narrowing. Tommy, she murmured, do you think ghosts drive Ostro-Daimlers? He didn't answer, but both of them knew not all the ghosts they'd summoned had stayed in the past. I've always said, declared Tuppence Beresford, that dead men are most inconsiderate. They never leave their papers in proper alphabetical order. Tommy, sprawled inelegantly on the arm of an armchair, lifted his eyebrows. They also failed to label their murderers neatly, which I find equally unhelpful. The Beresfords were in Captain Merriman's flat, a small, tidy place off Marylebone High Street, thick with the scent of pipe tobacco and quiet masculine order. Merriman's belongings had been released by the police after their perfunctory inquiry concluded that the good captain had died of natural causes. Tuppence, however, considered such an official conclusion a challenge rather than a reassurance. The air was filled with the soft rustle of drawers opening, papers shifting, the occasional sigh. Nothing suspicious so far, Tommy said, holding up a file marked Personal Correspondence 1948, unless the Ministry of Supply ever murdered a man by boredom. Tuppence was standing by the mantel, where a small painting hung slightly crooked. Tommy, look at this. He ambled over. Charming. A street in Vienna, by the look of it. Watercolour. Rather dull. Dull paintings in the homes of murdered men, she said thoughtfully, are rarely dull at all. He gave her a long-suffering look. You're suggesting that Captain Merriman's artistic taste was a cover for criminal intrigue? I'm suggesting, she said, lifting the frame from the hook, that Merriman's taste for espionage never left him. She turned the picture over. The backing paper was intact, but along the inner edge of the wooden frame, faint indentations ran in irregular groups, short and long scratches. Tommy whistled softly. That looked suspiciously like Morse. Exactly what I thought. They carried the painting to the desk. Tuppence fetched a magnifying glass from the drawer and leaned close, tracing each tiny mark with a pencil tip. Dot, 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 dash, dash, dot, dash, dot, she murmured, jotting down the sequence. Her brow furrowed in concentration. Do you realize, said Tommy, that if anyone's watching us through the window right now, we look like two middle-aged treasure hunters deciphering wallpaper? Then let's hope they're impressed. She finished scribbling and sat back. All right, listen. The first part gives a coordinate, latitude and longitude. The second part spells out words. Second son inherits. Tommy straightened. Good Lord, that's not a code phrase, it's a riddle. Or a legal reference, Tuppence mused. In inheritance law, the second son receives nothing unless something unusual was arranged. He frowned. Could it refer to Leitner? Or to his father, she said softly. Colonel Weiss had 2 sons. If Leitner is indeed one of them, he may be searching for something his father left behind, something hidden perhaps at those coordinates. Vienna again, said Tommy grimly. It always circles back. Tuppence set the frame down carefully. Merriman must have discovered the location of whatever Weiss left, the so-called legacy. That's why he died. Tommy walked to the window, hands in pockets. The London afternoon glowed weakly beyond the glass, pale and indifferent. You know, Tuppence, this is no longer about curiosity. It's turning into revenge, someone tying up the loose ends of the past, and we've obligingly made ourselves the next thread. That's never stopped us before, she said briskly. We should go back to Red House. He turned. Now? Now, before the second son inherits anything else, including our graves. The drive back to Market Harborough was a long one, and the country roads were half deserted in the late afternoon. The rhythmic hum of the motor car left space for thoughts neither of them wanted to voice. At last, Tommy said, If Leitner truly is Weiss's son, do you suppose he wants the same thing his father did? Power, control? Possibly, but there's another kind of inheritance, Tuppence said quietly. Guilt. He glanced at her. You think he wants redemption? I think he wants something that belonged to his father, to understand him, or perhaps to bury him properly. Either way, he's dangerous. She looked out the window as fields rolled past. Do you remember Weiss, Tommy? The way he smiled when we thought we'd trapped him in Zurich, as if losing were merely another strategy. Oh, I remember, said Tommy grimly. He was the sort of man who could turn defeat into an investment. If Leitner's his son, he's inherited the knack. By the time they reached Red House, the evening light was fading. The property looked deceptively calm, ivy glinting silver under the first touch of moonlight. Not a curtain moved, said Tommy. Either he's out or he's waiting. Let's hope for the former, Tuppence murmured. They parked discreetly near the hedgerow and approached the main door. Tuppence knocked once. No answer. She tried again. Silence. Tommy cupped his hands to the window and peered in. Drawing room empty. No lights. Try the side door, she said. They circled round the gravel path to the smaller entrance by the conservatory. It too was unlocked. Not his usual caution, Tommy said quietly. Either he's become careless, or he wanted us to find it this way. The house greeted them with stillness. The air smelled faintly of candle wax and something floral, perhaps the housekeeper's doing, before she'd met her untimely end. Tuppence lit a lamp from the hall table. Let's be efficient, darling. Drawing room first. They moved through the corridor. The door stood slightly ajar as though someone had left in haste. The moment Tuppence entered, she stopped. Tommy! On the table lay a single sheet of paper, folded neatly, and beside it a stick of red sealing wax, still fresh, as if recently pressed. The wax bore a small insignia, a hawk with spread wings above a bar of laurel leaves. Tommy whistled softly. Weiss's seal. Tuppence unfolded the note. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate. You're too late. The legacy is already claimed. Below, the signature, R. Leitner. Tommy read it over her shoulder. He's gone, and he's taken whatever Merriman found. She sank into the nearest chair, the letter trembling faintly in her hand. He knew we'd come. He's mocking us. Or warning us, Tommy said. He turned the note over, examining it for any further code, but it was blank. Tuppence leaned back, eyes scanning the room. Something about the arrangement felt wrong, too tidy, too deliberate. This isn't flight, she murmured. It's staging. He wanted us to see this, to believe he'd gone. Tommy crossed to the fireplace. Then what's he doing instead? Her gaze landed on the mantelpiece. A single photograph stood there, recently placed. Not Weiss, not Leitner. Merriman. The same image from the cellar photo, but cropped. Tuppence rose slowly. He's taunting us with Merriman's death. But why leave this behind if he's finished? Because he hasn't finished, Tommy said grimly. This was never about money. It's about revenge. The debts of war. His father's debts. The phrase hung between them. Tuppence's eyes moved to the red seal again. If Weiss left instructions for his sons, that phrase, second son inherits, might not refer to property. It might mean responsibility. Leitner believes he's fulfilling a command, claiming his father's vengeance as an inheritance. Tommy nodded slowly. And if there's a second son— She looked up sharply. You think there's another? Possibly. Leitner mentioned we once, not I. Remember? We all have our debts. Her expression hardened. Then there's still someone else, and the legacy may not be what we think it is. They searched the rest of the house methodically. Leitner's study was stripped bare, drawers emptied, shelves cleared. Only an ashtray held a clue. A matchbook from a Vienna hotel, Hotel Adlerhof. Tuppence turned it over in her palm. So that's where he's gone. Vienna, the coordinates Merriman left. Tommy took it from her gently. And we'll be right behind him. In the hallway, the wind rattled a loose shutter. The sound made both of them turn instinctively, nerves stretched taut. It's strange, Tuppence said softly. How the past doesn't die. It just waits for the right cue to take the stage again. Tommy smiled wryly. Then let's hope we remember our lines. They stood together, framed in the doorway, as the last light faded beyond the garden. Somewhere in the trees a nightbird cried, brief, sharp, and final. Tuppence folded the note and slipped it into her handbag. He's gone to claim his father's sins, she said. We'll go to stop him. Tommy nodded. And if we're too late? She looked toward the shadowed windows, her expression set with quiet determination. Then we'll make sure the legacy claims no one else. They left Red House behind, its windows glinting faintly in the dusk, like the eyes of something ancient, waiting to see how its story would end. Vienna, said Tuppence Beresford, peering out of the airplane window as the clouds thinned to reveal a river coiling through a patchwork of red roofs and white spires. Still beautiful enough to make one forget its sins. Tommy glanced over the newspaper he was pretending to read. Spoken like a poet, or a woman about to get us arrested for espionage. Possibly both, she replied serenely. The engines hummed with that steady confidence peculiar to European flights, half modernity, half nostalgia. The post-war world had rediscovered its appetite for travel, but Vienna still carried a whisper of intrigue in its air, the ghosts of the old empire jostling politely with the uniforms of new bureaucracies. As they descended, Tuppence said quietly, It feels strange coming back here after all these years. I can almost hear the waltzes and the boots that followed them. Tommy folded his paper. Let's just hope the only dance we're invited to this time involves afternoon tea. Their hotel, the Adlerhof, stood on a quiet street off the Ringstrasse, a grand but slightly faded building whose mirrored lobby still reflected the ghosts of diplomats and spies. The clerk greeted them with old-world courtesy and the faint air of someone who knew much and said nothing. Tuppence inspected their suite with professional suspicion. Decent enough. 2 exits, 3 mirrors, and an unconvincing painting over the bed. Lovely, said Tommy. I was hoping for unconvincing art. It makes one feel at home. She drew back the curtain, gazing at the city below. Trams gliding past, women in scarves carrying baskets of bread, and the distant echo of a violin from a cafe. Vienna always looks civilized on the surface, but underneath it remembers everything. Tommy joined her, including Weiss. Especially Weiss, she murmured, and perhaps his sons. That afternoon they paid a visit to the British consulate, where Tommy had arranged to meet an old acquaintance, Sir Henry Mallinson, a retired diplomat whose memory was as sharp as his waistcoat was outdated. He greeted them in his office with a warmth that was only partly genuine. Beresford, my dear fellow, and Mrs. Beresford. Still charming, still dangerous, I see. Both skills age remarkably well, said Tuppence. We need information, Sir Henry. He raised an eyebrow. You usually do. About what this time? Please don't say it's a missing cat again. Not quite, Tommy said. We're looking for a man, Dr. Rudolf Leitner, Austrian national. We believe he may be using diplomatic channels to travel freely, possibly connected to a man named Weiss. At the name, the older man's expression altered. Weiss, he repeated softly. Now that's a ghost worth exorcising, the father or the son. So there is a son, Tuppence said quickly. There were 2, Sir Henry replied, lowering his voice, Karl and Rudolf. The elder, Karl Weiss, was a zealot, brilliant, ruthless, a fanatic to the end. The younger Rudolf was quieter, vanished after the war. Some said he took holy orders, others said he took his father's papers. Tommy leaned forward. Papers? Intelligence files, said Sir Henry grimly. The Colonel had compiled records of everyone he dealt with, collaborators, informants, even Allied agents who double-crossed their own. Those files disappeared in 45. We called it the Legacy. If Karl or Rudolph ever found them, they could hold half of Europe hostage to its own shame. Tuppence gave a low whistle. So Merriman wasn't chasing money, he was chasing the truth, and the truth turned out to be worth killing for. Sir Henry nodded. Indeed. If you're looking for Leitner, you'll find whispers of him at the Café Havelka. Scholars, journalists, ex-officers, they all drink there. But tread carefully. In Vienna, gossip is just espionage spoken softly. The café was as Sir Henry had promised, a place where history had merely changed the uniforms of its patrons. Smoke hung in the air like tired perfume, and the marble tables bore the scars of endless debates. Tommy and Tuppence took a small corner table. Tuppence ordered coffee and sac à tort. Tommy requested the local equivalent of ale, which arrived lukewarm but resolute. At a neighbouring table, two men argued in German about politics. Another man in a shabby overcoat scribbled notes furiously on the margin of a newspaper. "Reminds me of the old days," Tommy murmured. "Half of them are spies, and the other half suspect they are." "Then we'll fit right in," said Tuppence. They had been there nearly 20 minutes when a voice behind them said quietly, "You are asking questions about Dr. Leitner." They turned. A thin, elderly man stood beside the table, hat in hand, his eyes shrewd and weary. Tommy gestured to the empty chair. "You've the advantage of us, sir." "I am Otto Kremer," the man said. "Once of the Foreign Ministry. I knew your Colonel Weiss and his son Karl, the one you should truly fear." "Then you've seen him?" asked Tuppence. "Once. Years ago, after the war. He was broken, but not repentant. He swore his father's enemies would one day pay. He said, 'The debts of war are never fully paid.'" The phrase made both Beresfords exchange a glance. Kremer leaned closer. "If this Leitner is truly Rudolf Weiss, he may not be the enemy you think. He was the gentler one, the scholar. But Karl vanished, and when he returns, blood will follow." Tommy frowned. "You believe Karl Weiss is still alive?" "I believe," said Kremer softly, "that the old wars never end. They simply change uniforms." He rose, glancing nervously toward the door. "Do not seek them. They will find you soon enough." And before they could stop him, he slipped away into the smoke-filled crowd, leaving behind the faint scent of fear. Back in their hotel, the Beresfords sat amid the evening quiet, the sounds of trams drifting up from the street below. "Well," said Tuppence, "we've managed to collect 2 names, one ghost and an ominous proverb. Progress." Tommy poured them both a small drink. Progress of the most alarming kind. She accepted her glass, eyes still thoughtful. "It's extraordinary, isn't it? All this for files, pieces of paper. Imagine being murdered over paperwork." He chuckled despite himself. Some would call that poetic justice. They drank in companionable silence, the light dimming into amber. Outside, Vienna glittered faintly, elegant, deceptive. They were woken in the small hours by a sound, subtle, precise, metallic. A drawer sliding open. Tommy sat up instantly, motioning Tuppence to stay still. The darkness pressed close, heavy with silence. Then came another sound, the faint scrape of leather against the parquet floor. Tommy moved quietly from the bed, reaching for the revolver in his suitcase. He crossed the room in 2 silent strides and flung the door wide, but the corridor was empty. He snapped on the light. The room was in disarray, drawers open, suitcases overturned, the wardrobe gaping like a wound. Tuppence was already on her feet. "Well," she said dryly, "either the maid has an enthusiasm problem, or we've had visitors." Tommy checked the balcony doors, unlocked. They came from outside, ground-floor roof access, perhaps. What were they looking for? He pointed to the writing desk. The painting from Merriman's flat, the one with the cipher, lay face down, its frame splintered. "They wanted to be sure we hadn't deciphered it fully," he said grimly. Tuppence lifted the broken frame, her expression tightening. "They didn't take it, which means they already know what it says." Tommy's mouth hardened. "And that they know we know." He went to the window. The street below was calm, too calm. A car stood idling under the lamplight, sleek, black, official-looking. After a moment it rolled away, its engine fading into the night. "Someone's watching," he said. "They're waiting to see what we'll do next." Tuppence exhaled slowly. "Then we'll give them something to watch. Tomorrow we visit those coordinates." He looked back, startled. "You mean—" "Yes, Merriman's coordinates. Wherever this legacy was hidden, it's time we stopped letting ghosts set the route." She crossed the room and took his hand. "If Carl Weiss is alive, he's hunting the same thing. Leitner may already be dead, but whatever they're fighting over, it ends with us." Tommy smiled faintly. "Spoken like a woman who's not yet had breakfast." "Spoken," she corrected, like someone tired of letting the past dictate the present. They stood together by the shattered frame, the lamplight casting their reflections into the cracked glass, two figures from a bygone age, still chasing truths the world preferred to forget. The next morning dawned cold and crystalline. The Danube glimmered like steel under the early sun. Tuppence packed methodically while Tommy checked his revolver. "You know," he said, "it's a curious thing. Coming to Vienna always makes me feel both young and far too old." "That's because," Tuppence replied, "we're old enough to remember what young people forget, that history bites back." She closed the case, snapped it shut, and turned to him with her usual half-smile. "Shall we go pay our respects to the legacy?" Tommy nodded, "and perhaps see who's come to collect the inheritance." They left the room together, the door closing softly behind them, leaving only the echo of footsteps and the faint smell of danger hanging in the Viennese air. That night, in the museum's sealed vault, they confronted the Weiss brothers, Rudolf trying to surrender the files, Karl arriving with a gun, a struggle, a shot, Rudolf down, Karl escaping wounded into the dark. The morning after the vault, Vienna felt too bright for grief. The museum's facade gleamed white in the early sun, its marble pillars innocent of the night's violence. Tuppence Beresford stood on the front steps, her coat buttoned high, eyes shaded by a borrowed hat. Inside, the air smelled faintly of polish and bureaucracy, as though history itself had already tidied away the evidence. Tommy joined her, his arm in a makeshift sling from the scrape he'd earned dragging Leitner to safety. "Inspector Heinrich will see us now," he said grimly, "and he's not pleased we've been playing archaeologist without permission." "Inspectors rarely are," Tuppence replied. "They dislike amateurs, especially when the amateurs keep being right." Inspector Heinrich was a tall man with the look of someone permanently unimpressed by miracles. His office, tucked behind the museum's administrative wing, was lined with cabinets full of files and the stale aroma of cigarettes. He gestured for them to sit, his movements crisp, economical. "So," he said, adjusting his spectacles, "2 English civilians, 1 dead Austrian national, 1 injured, 1 missing firearm, and a vault that does not officially exist. Do I have it right?" Tommy spread his hands. "You've a gift for summary, Inspector." Heinrich's gaze didn't waver. "It's a talent born of paperwork. You are fortunate that the British Embassy intervened, otherwise you would be answering questions in less comfortable surroundings." Tuppence leaned forward slightly. "Inspector, there's something you should know. The man we believe to be Dr. Rudolf Leitner was indeed one of Weiss's sons. But he wasn't the only one. There's another, a brother. He's the one who fired the shot." Heinrich's eyes flickered, interest breaking through the weariness. "We suspected as much. Our surveillance team had been tracking Leitner for weeks. He was under observation, you see, but last night, one of our men, a museum guard, vanished. He had falsified his records months ago. His name was Karl Leitner, born Karl Weiss." "Then he's still alive," Tommy said quietly. "For the moment," Heinrich replied. "My men are searching the building. It seems your midnight archaeology has stirred more than dust." They followed him through the museum corridors. The morning staff had been sent home, the galleries silent except for their footsteps echoing between marble walls. Shafts of pale light slanted across statues and empty display cases, lending everything an air of theatrical calm, the kind that breaks easily. A uniformed officer approached, saluting. "Herr Inspector, blood on the stairs to the lower gallery. Not fresh, but recent." Heinrich's jaw set. "Come." They descended the wide staircase, the air growing colder. The traces led through the Roman Antiquities Hall, shards of broken glass, a smear of red against the stone. At the far end, a door stood ajar. Heinrich raised a hand, signalling silence. From inside came a low, rasping sound, the uneven rhythm of laboured breath. Karl Weiss sat slumped beside a marble column, one hand pressed to his side where the blood had already darkened his shirt. His pistol lay just out of reach. The expression on his face was neither anger nor fear, only exhaustion. He looked up as they entered. "So," he said in English, his voice raw, "the end comes with an audience." Heinrich stepped forward cautiously. "Karl Weiss, you are under arrest for—" "No need," Weiss interrupted with a faint sardonic smile. "You'll have your confession without persuasion." Tuppence moved nearer, though Tommy caught her arm. She shook him off gently. "Let him speak." Karl's gaze settled on her. "You were there. You saw my brother die. He wanted forgiveness." He spat the word bitterly. "I wanted revenge." "Revenge for what?" she asked softly. "For our father," he said. "Not his crimes, his defeat. They made him a monster, but he believed himself a patriot. He thought the world would understand once they read his truths. Instead, they buried them. And him." He coughed, the sound tearing through the quiet. "Rudolf wanted to destroy the files, to erase shame. I wanted to restore fear, the only justice left. Those papers were power. The kind men like your Merriman stole from us after the war." Tommy's voice was steady. "You murdered your brother to preserve your father's lies." Karl's eyes met his, cold, weary, defiant. "No, I murdered him because he pitied you." He slumped back against the column, breath coming shallow. "Take the files, burn them, keep them. It doesn't matter. You cannot cleanse the blood written there." Heinrich knelt briefly, checking his pulse. "He's dying." Karl gave a faint, mocking laugh. "So is history, Inspector." And then, without ceremony, his eyes closed. For a long moment, no one spoke. The echo of the gunshot from the night before seemed to linger still, as if the marble walls had memorized it. Tuppence exhaled slowly. Two brothers, one seeking absolution, the other vengeance, and both ended in the same way. Heinrich rose, his face unreadable. Perhaps there was never much difference between them. He turned to his men. "Secure the area. The vault will be sealed again, and the English visitors will accompany me." Back in his office, Heinrich lit a cigarette with practiced precision. "The files you found are now under police custody. They will be catalogued, examined, and, I suspect, never spoken of again." Tuppence bristled. "You can't just bury them." "I can," Heinrich said simply. "And I will, for the sake of peace. Do you know how many of the names in those documents belong to men now sitting in parliaments, embassies, ministries? The war ended 10 years ago, but the balance remains fragile. Truth can destroy what victory only barely held together." Tommy met his gaze evenly. "That's not your decision alone, Inspector." Heinrich's smile was thin. "No, it's yours too, apparently. The embassy requested that you both retain one crate for review in London. Consider it an experiment in moral endurance." He tapped ash into a tray. "I wish you luck with it. Truth, I find, rarely thanks its discoverers." Hours later, in their hotel room, the single crate sat open between them. Inside, the folders looked almost innocent, manila envelopes tied neatly with string. Each name, each date was a ghost that might still walk. Tuppence sat cross-legged on the floor, a sheaf of papers in her lap. "Some of these are fakes," she said. "Fabrications for leverage. Others are real. Look, agents, officers, even politicians. Betrayals on every side." Tommy poured 2 glasses of brandy. "There's enough here to unmake half of Europe." She accepted the glass absently. "What do we do with it, Tommy?" He stared at the flame in the hearth. "What do we always do? We tell the truth." She gave a small, ironic smile. "How noble, and how English. But this truth could destroy people who've rebuilt their lives, perhaps even saved others since. Can we be sure exposing it won't cause more harm?" "Can we be sure hiding it won't?" he countered. She looked down at the top envelope. The name typed there made her freeze. "Oh." Tommy heard the change in her tone. "What is it?" She turned the envelope toward him. The name was clear. Major Henry Burnham. Tommy's face hardened. "Our Burnham, the man who was with us in London." "Yes," she whispered. "Miss Winship's friend. The one who laughed about his ticker. There are coded entries here, money transferred, identities leaked. He was selling information during the war. Tommy's jaw tightened. Are you certain? She nodded. It's his handwriting on the verification slips. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hiss of the fire. At last Tuppence said quietly, We must give it all to the authorities, even this. The truth must out, or it isn't justice, it's theatre. Tommy didn't answer. He rose, went to the window and stood for a long time looking out over the Danube, its surface glinting faintly in the dusk. When he turned back, his expression was calm, too calm. You're right, he said. Everything must go. He knelt by the crate gathering the folders. As Tuppence packed the rest into a satchel, he lingered over one envelope, the one with Burnham's name. For a long moment, he held it near the light, reading the faded type as if testing whether the letters themselves could lie. Then, quietly, almost absently, he fed it into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and was gone. Later, as they sat side by side in silence, Tuppence glanced at him. You burned one. He didn't deny it. Yes. Which? The one that needed burning. Her gaze stayed on him, steady but not angry. Because he was your friend? Because I can't decide whether justice or mercy is the greater virtue, he said softly. And because I've seen too much of what happens when men choose one without the other. She sighed, then reached over and laid her hand over his. You've spared one soul and perhaps damned another. That's the trouble with truth. It never lets anyone go clean. He smiled faintly. We'll call it balance, shall we? Balance, she repeated. That's what marriage is for. They sat quietly then, the fire crackling, the last of the smoke drifting up like forgotten secrets escaping into air. Outside, Vienna's night hummed with ordinary life again. Trams clattering, cafes laughing, the city pretending history was safely buried beneath its polished stones. But on the table between them lay the unopened crate, full of names and ghosts, and the faint scent of burnt paper hung in the air, a reminder that every legacy, no matter how buried, demands a price to be paid. London had the good grace to be grey that morning, not sullen, merely reflective, as if it too were nursing an old memory. The Beresford sitting room at South Audley Mansions glowed with the golden calm of early winter light. A fire murmured in the grate. A teapot steamed gently on the low table between two chairs that had weathered more intrigues than most governments. Tuppence was knitting, or rather pretending to. The wool trailed languidly from her fingers, while her gaze rested on the letter lying unopened beside her saucer. Tommy, leaning against the mantel, watched her over the rim of his cup. You've been staring at that envelope for 15 minutes, my love. Either you're hoping it'll confess, or you've gone sentimental. She smiled faintly. A little of both, perhaps. It's from Vienna, official seal. I can't decide whether to open it or feed it to the fire. Open it, he said. If it's from the Foreign Office, they'll only send another. Bureaucracy is harder to kill than guilt. Tuppence sighed, broke the seal, and unfolded the letter. The paper crackled faintly. Government paper always did, as though it resented being used for anything so human as emotion. She read silently, then handed it to him. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Beresford, the enclosed confirms receipt of the recovered material known as the legacy files. In accordance with international agreement, the documents have been secured under joint custody. Certain personal items retrieved from the scene are being returned to you as a matter of record. Your assistance in this matter will remain confidential. H. Mallinson, British Embassy, Vienna. Tommy folded the letter carefully. That's the end of it then. The files locked away, the ghosts pacified, and no one the wiser. Until the next historian unseals them in 50 years, said Tuppence. Imagine the thrill when they discover how clever we were. He chuckled, coming to sit opposite her. We've had enough of cleverness. I'd settle for a dull fortnight. Dullness never lasts with us, she said. You forget. We attract unfinished business the way jam attracts wasps. The clock chimed 11, an elegant, well-behaved chime that suited their household. Fritz, their long-suffering housekeeper, appeared to clear the breakfast things, his disapproval polite but pronounced. Madam has not eaten much, he observed reproachfully. Madam is reflecting, said Tuppence. On what, may I ask? On the persistent habit of wars to leave riddles behind, she said lightly. He bowed slightly, non-committal as ever, and withdrew. When the door closed, Tommy said, "You're thinking about Merriman again." "Of course I am." Her knitting slipped from her lap. "He's the only piece that doesn't fit. Everyone else had a motive. Leitner, Carl, even the inspector. But Merriman, he started it all, and then conveniently died before explaining why." Tommy stretched his legs toward the fire. "He sent the first letter, the one warning you to watch Red House, didn't he? You said the typewriter marks matched his old office machine." "Yes," she murmured. "And yet the letter arrived after his death. How does one warn oneself posthumously?" "By planning ahead," Tommy said dryly. "He was always an organized fellow." "Organized enough," she said, "to have foreseen his own murder?" Tommy looked into the fire. "You think he baited the trap himself?" "I think," said Tuppence slowly, "that he knew the legacy would surface eventually, and he knew who would come for it. Perhaps he wanted us to be the ones to find it first." Tommy's expression softened. "You're giving him a rather flattering afterlife, darling." "Am I?" She leaned back, eyes distant. "Or am I just trying to make sense of how we ended up chasing a dead man's conscience across Europe?" The post arrived with its usual lack of ceremony, a thump through the letterbox, followed by a polite shuffle from the hallway. Tommy retrieved the bundle and began sorting through it. Bills, invitations, catalogues, one small envelope addressed in looping handwriting. "Another admirer," he teased, handing it to her. Tuppence frowned. No postmark, no return address. She opened it, expecting another bureaucratic form, but what fell into her lap was a postcard, a picture of Red House taken from the front drive. The image was sunlit and peaceful, the ivy trailing over the windows, the gravel path glinting like silver. But on the back, beneath a few typed words, someone had written a short message in blue ink. "For old time's sake, H.M." Tuppence stared at it for a long moment. Tommy leaned over. "H.M. Merriman?" She nodded slowly. "Henry Merriman. But this is impossible." "Impossible's a word we should have retired years ago," Tommy said gently. She turned the card over again, studying the photograph. "It's recent. Look, the front hedge was trimmed only this summer. Someone took this after his death." "Then someone wants us to believe he's alive." "Or," Tuppence murmured, "he left it with a friend to post after. The old fox always planned 2 moves ahead." Tommy's brow furrowed. "You think he orchestrated everything, from beyond the grave?" "Not quite," she said, "but he may have set the first domino. Perhaps he knew the Weiss brothers were closing in. Perhaps he wanted us to finish what he couldn't." She traced the signature with her fingertip. "For old time's sake. Yes, that sounds like him. Sentimental old fox." For a while they sat in silence, listening to the gentle crackle of the fire. Outside, a milk van rattled past. The city went about its business, blissfully unaware of the debts it owed to secrets. Finally, Tuppence said, "Do you ever think, Tommy, that we've become custodians of other people's regrets?" He smiled faintly. "Better that than collectors of our own." She shook her head. "No, I mean it. Every case we've ever had, it's always someone trying to right a wrong that can't be undone. Merriman, Leitner, even Carl in his own twisted way. They all wanted to balance scales that were never built straight to begin with." He poured them each a measure of sherry. "And we? What do we want?" She accepted her glass thoughtfully. "I used to think adventure. Now I think it's closure. Only closure never really arrives, does it?" Tommy raised his glass in mock solemnity. "To our eternal lack of closure." Tuppence clinked hers lightly against his. "To old enemies, dear, and better endings." They drank. The warmth settled through the quiet room like a benediction. Tuppence leaned back, eyes half closed, and said softly, "Enemies grow old, but legacies never do." Tommy smiled. "That sounds like something you should embroider on a cushion." "I might," she said, "though I'd rather we didn't need the reminder." He reached for her hand. "Then let's forget it for one evening. We've done our part. The rest belongs to history, or to whatever poor devil decides to dig through the archives next." Tuppence squeezed his fingers gently. "You'll notice, of course, that I'm not promising we're finished." "I never doubted it," he said, smiling. "You'd be bored before the ashes cooled." The fire sank lower. The last of the daylight slipped from the window leaving the room aglow with soft lamplight and shared memory. On the mantel beside the clock, the postcard from Red House stood propped against a photograph of their younger selves, bright-eyed, reckless, laughing. Outside, the city moved on, trams and laughter, the hum of peacetime life. Inside, two detectives sat in companionable silence, watching the embers fade, their thoughts quietly aligned with the unseen rhythm of time. The case was closed, the debts were paid. But somewhere, in the soft rustle of the fire, the past whispered its small, persistent truth, that some legacies never die, they simply change hands, and for Tommy and Tuppence Beresford, that was ending enough.